Welcome back to another episode of Workish. I am so ridiculously excited to have this episode today. Today I have Hannah Pineda joining me, or as we have often been referred to as Hannah Squared. So today's podcast comes from Hannah Squared. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited to bring you to the listeners and introduce you to everybody.
Of course, I'm so happy to be here. Charlie is excited as well.
Charlie's
Um,
excited as well.
yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on here. It's not often that we get to have an excuse to ramble on and, you know, have other people listen to what we have to say instead of just our own self-importance on each other. But, this is awesome.
Yeah, this is great. So most people understand Hannah is my best friend, basically from high school and on. We met when we were in ninth grade. I was in ninth grade. She was in 10th grade because she was an overachiever and skipped a grade. But we
Missed all the
connected.
good stuff.
Yeah, we connected really early on, and have had a pretty great friendship since. And then as I was starting this series talking about, okay, I'm going to bring in a bunch of Generation Zs. We're going to talk to a bunch of Gen Zs across the board. And we're going to talk to some who are deep into their careers. We're going to talk to some who are just starting out. And we're going to talk to some who are still in their educations, because I think it's important to show just a variety of where the entire generation is, because it's very different despite where their age is, if they're young or if they're old. Even the older Gen Zs are still going through so many different levels of experiences. So I was excited to bring you on. You are currently doing your Master's of Neuroscience.
Yes.
But before we get there, we're going to go back
Yeah.
to where you graduated high school. And
Mhm.
for the last series, this was a much longer story for most of them. They were 40, 50, well into their careers. And so we had lots of pivotal moments. But I'm really excited to talk down to kind of more the nitty gritty of what you've been doing and how you got to where you are. And then we're going to talk a little bit about who Gen Z is as a whole and kind of how you've experienced some of those normal phenomenons. That's not the way you say the word, across the entire generation. So take me back to
Sure.
the moment where you graduated high school. What are you doing? Where are you going? What's the first step you took post grad?
So technically, my first step actually was with you. The first thing I did after graduating high school was work at a summer camp at Muskoka Woods with yourself, of course, and that was our
Oh,
little.
come on. We can't call it a camp.
We
You
can
know
call
that. We can't call it a camp. It's a resort for children.
it a cult with children who have very rich parents. That's what it was.
It was something. It was something. No, if you can send your kids to Muskoka Woods, props
Good
to
for you.
you. But dang, working there was an experience. Okay, so but then after that, you went to what school?
McMaster was where I studied for my Bachelor's of Science in kinesiology. And I had a great experience while being there. I enjoy school just generally. I'm sure that influenced my experience there to enjoy all the school that I did. And it was there that in my fourth year, I worked in an integrative neuromuscular biology lab. And I did a lab practicum there. And that was a really pivotal experience within my education. It made me realize how much I wanted to pursue research in the future. So beyond that, I then did an undergrad thesis. I extended my whole graduation to take a fifth year so that way I would have time to do the entire undergrad thesis. And I
Wow. Okay, so let's start with year one.
Sure.
Did you know what you wanted to do? Were you like, I'm starting this kinesiology degree. I know exactly where I want to go after this. I know exactly the path that I want to take. Or were you starting it because it was interesting to you? Were you starting it because it was the only thing you could think of? What was the reason for that?
I think a little bit of both of your first suggestions there. Yes, I did have a slight idea of what I wanted to do. Also, I was really interested in just like the human body and movement. I was always an athlete growing up, and I think a lot of athletes find themselves in kinesiology related programs, whether it's exercise science, whatever it is. So I felt like it would be a good fit for me. I thought I was 17 when I went to university at first, so pretty young. You don't really know what you want from the world. During my first year, I actually struggled a lot academically. I found the transition from the learning style where in high school I really didn't have to do much and I could study the night before and I would get very good grades. Um, Transition to first year where you're in massive classes with 1,000 people in it. There is so much workload. You have 5 classes all with modules to do, tutorials to attend to, 3 lectures a week, assignments, midterms, whatever it is. So adjusting to that type of workload while also being very young and not having been needed incredible time management in the past to be successful, I was like, wow, I actually have no recipe here for success. And that certainly showed in my grades my first year. And then in my second year, I was adjusting a little bit more. I had kind of like accustomed to my own like social circle as well. So I had more support, I would say. And then also people to kind of base off of their own success and use that as a modulator in my own, ways of dealing with
Yeah.
workload.
Yeah. You were
And
able to see somebody else's formula for how they were finding what they were getting. And you were like, okay, now I know what I need to do.
exactly. And I don't know, I think like the glitz and the glamour of like, I'm an undergrad student, like had kind of wore off and I'm like, okay, I'm in school. Like that's probably and yeah, so
And
at
that
this point,
transition's hard though, because
it
you're
was
you're
really
getting out of, and I know specifically both you and I came from differently sheltered, but sheltered nonetheless homes. And so moving into your first year of undergrad, you're like, woo, I can do anything I want to do. I have freedom. I have all my time and space and like everything that I can do.
yeah.
But there are guidelines in place for reasons, and unfortunately, sometimes we learn that afterwards. But it can be challenging to kind of transition. Do you think that that had a big portion to do with it as well, like finding your own way apart from your parents, or do you think that it was like mainly the education was different and I was in a different place and it was just hard? Do you think that that had anything to do with it, or not really?
I think both. I've always been really independent. I from like being a little girl, I just have craved like this adult sense of autonomy that you're just running and running to. You're like, I want to be able to do what I want. I wouldn't want to tell anybody what I'm doing, and I'm just gonna make all my own decisions. So my first kind of taste of that in first year was a lot, and of course I was not equipped, I think, to handle that fully. So you do your best, you navigate life as you can, and there was
I
lots
would
of
just be
hard, yeah, but
Yeah, I would just be curious if the hump of the first year was more the academic shift or was more just the
I think
lifestyle
both.
shift.
I think
Yeah.
both. I think that they're really integrated because it's like it's almost like the work life balance also applies to school life, and
Yeah.
school is especially one of those things where it follows you at home all the time. You have homework, you have whatever. Like I was like skipping class to do work, so
Yeah.
it kind of felt like you're running around the track a little bit and never catching up, and playing catch up at school, but also wanting to, have these experiences, say yes to opportunities with my friends, and for the first time being able to decide whether or not I was, able to do these things, and maybe saying yes to too many things, and again, not having the skills to have like really good time management and balance of both. So yeah, definitely
That's
both.
so hard. They should teach people that. Like, I mean, I
Sure.
know that schools have clubs and schools have sports, and so there are some ways that they should like can be teaching kids about time management and the value of saying yes and the value of saying no. But yeah, dang, you're absolutely right. That transition from like regardless of who your parents are and the way that you were raised, that transition is going to be hard. And so
Yeah. Well,
that
when
should
you're
be
that
something taught in high school.
Yeah, I just think it's you're such an impressionable age, and a lot of people go to university and they don't know anybody. They didn't come with a friend, and when I went to Mac, I didn't know anybody from my school going there. There were a couple people from our hometown region that I was like, oh, I've heard of them, and they'll be there, and but still, it's like you're so afraid of being alone. There, the transition is like it's a little intimidating, so of course it becomes kind of easy to be like, I'm just gonna go with the group here because we're all trying to, fight isolation and loneliness and all that kind of stuff. So it's like you're maybe not always making the best decisions for yourself, but at least it means that like you have like a pack kind of to coexist with and share experiences with.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's hard to navigate.
It is hard to navigate. It is hard to navigate. And for anyone that's experiencing that right now, if they're listening, I mean, that's so normal. That's exactly what happens to almost everybody. But, anyways, so you navigate through the first year, you get into the second year, you're starting to get more of a stride in your education.
I would
Is
say so.
this when you're like starting to fine tune some of what you were doing in your fourth and fifth year, or were you still kind of trying to figure out where you wanted to go from here? What happened
Definitely
here?
trying to, yeah, mostly trying to figure out. At this point was when I would have started volunteering in like physio clinics. In my third year, I was at a chiro clinic, and doing these kind of placements and having more hands-on courses made it clear to me that I was like, I feel like I'm not getting full enjoyment out of the typical career path that one might take out of kinesiology. And that was a little disappointing because I was like, I thought this was going to be something that would really work for me. And it's not that I'm not interested in the concepts exactly. I'm just not as much as a hands on, like clinical therapist kind of person than I thought I would be. I would find myself
Hmm.
in placements thinking, I don't want to make you stretch. I'm like, I don't care if you stretch or not. I'm like, why do I have to do it? So I was like, maybe I should think of a different career pathway. So into my upper years, in my third and fourth
How early on did that happen? Were you in those career or those placements in the first day? You were sitting there and you were like, "Oh, I have made a grave mistake," or did you get 4 or 5 months into it and then get sick of it and be like, "Oh, maybe I should be thinking of something different"? Like, when did that kind of trigger?
maybe like 3 or 4 weeks in. Like if the first couple
Okay.
of weeks when you're learning new skills, like of course it's a little more novel, so it's more stimulating because you're like just trying to keep up with everything. And by the time I'd had a routine and kind of knew what I was doing, I was like, this is like really not fun. So,
Yeah.
and I wanted it to be fun. It would have been really easy if I was just like, yep, this was all working fine, and I know what I'm going to do after this. But that was not my case. And then in my upper years, in my third and fourth years, when I had a lot more like choices into what courses I could take, and I didn't have as many like required courses to take, I found
Hmm.
myself taking a lot of research based courses where the structure for the course was to talk about, existing literature and then to go into the results and all that kind of stuff and how that applies big picture wise. And I really, really enjoyed those courses. And I realized that the things I liked about clinical work was not the work itself, but it was the content of, the theory behind it and working
Okay.
with the muscles and learning, the anatomy of everything. And so when I got into these, yeah, the research based courses, that was like really the pivotal point for me beyond my lab placements. That was what encouraged me to apply to a lab position and be like, maybe I should try doing this instead. Like I didn't even really
Hmm.
know that existed, like, growing up. So from there, I took. It's funny. I took this one course in my fourth year, my fall semester, and it was that class that I really enjoyed. It was a rigorous class. It was very hard. But I loved the content. It was very molecular, very genetic. And a lot of the research that we were shown was from that professor's lab. So then I reached out because he had let the class know that they were looking to fill positions for lab practicums and for undergrad theses. Or theses. So I applied for a lab practicum, which was only one semester. I thought, let's not commit to a full 2 semester long thesis project quite yet. So I did the first semester. I loved it. It was the most fun I'd ever had at school. I felt, like enamored kind of by all the things that was happening, being in the lab, seeing how, molecular stuff is so interesting to me because it's such small scale stuff that underlies all the big things that happen that we see, whether it be with like drug treatments or whatever it is, it all boils down to those molecular aspects. So that was really interesting to me. So that was when I then postponed my graduation. I was like, nope, I'm dropping 2 courses. I'm opening up space in the next year for me to be able to take on these and get my credits that way. And then I did my thesis, and yeah, it was history from there. I was like, I'm definitely doing research. And then the pandemic happened during my
So okay, wait. So you're
sure.
going through really quickly the thought of, oh gosh, where to dive in? The thought of pausing
Hmm.
and expanding your education and adding a year can be really scary.
Sure.
Why did you do it? Was it because you needed to have this extra education to get into the next thing afterwards, or was it because you had just found this new stream that you were interested in, or why'd you expand the year?
That's a good question. It's funny because at the time when I did it, it seemed like a no-brainer. I think that
It sounded like a no-brainer the way that you said it. I just want to understand.
yeah, that's such a good question. I think that for one, yes, it was an important step for me to take if I wanted to pursue graduate studies later. It's hard to get a graduate placement if you don't have any lab experience. And I really wanted to expand my own expertise in that region. And also, I felt like I hadn't seen enough or done enough in just the lab practicum. I was like, I'm hungry for more. I was like, I need to be here longer. I'm not ready to move on. I was like, I really like what we're doing here. And I want to be able to do my own thing. And where in the lab practicum, the premise was more so to just like shadow within the lab, be given a little, side task of the grad student, help them out with analyses and whatnot, and then to take a step further and then have my own project where, we brainstorm about my own research question. I'm collecting data, like, data and reviewing previous literature and like building my own story about whatever my thesis project was like. But yeah, so I wanted more time in there, and also it was a pretty important next step to take. And I think because I did skip a grade in elementary school. I was already a year ahead of the curve. So taking an extra year to myself didn't feel high pressure. I was like, I'm realistically going to be the age of what I would be supposed to be when I was graduating. And
Mhm.
also, the older I have gotten, the more I kind of adopt a mentality that there's no rush. There's like, what is the rush to get to point B from A? I'm like, if it I don't know, I didn't feel like I was being set back by taking more time. I felt like it was enhancing my experience more so than anything, really.
I love that. I have a very, I mean, I take perspective. Like I'm just so different. I'm like everything I need to do, I need to do it so fast. And I don't think that that is right in any way, shape, or form. It is a messed up trigger inside my head that I would love to learn to alter because you're right. There is literally no rush. But the concept, I mean, just for me, the concept of taking a year to step back would have been really challenging. I would have been like, but I'm so close to graduating. But to be able to have the granular perspective to step back and say, I am so close to graduating, but I'm not close to getting the education that I want. And that's what you go to school for. Like, so many people go to school for two different reasons, right? They go to school to get an education, or they go to school to get a certificate.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think I went to school to get a certificate. I think you went to school to get an education, and that's impressive. And I wish that anybody listening will do it to get an education, and that you can learn from my mistakes because I was a certificate kind of gal. Not that it doesn't serve a purpose, but
You gotta do what
anyways,
you gotta do. Yeah.
you gotta do what you gotta do, but like also try and learn from all the money that you're spending. Um,
Of course.
okay, okay, so you took time to stay, then you did your research
Mhm.
year, your final year. COVID hit. This is where
Yes.
I paused you. Keep the story rolling.
Yeah, so the way I phrased it before was that COVID hit kind of after I'd done my thesis. It was actually all during.
Yeah.
It was during, this also was a big factor. Also, I have to say, this influenced my ability to be like, no, I'll stay like for longer. There's no rush. During the end of my fourth year, when this was coming to the point where I was like, no, I'm going to extend my graduation date. COVID had just hit in March. So April was the end of my fourth year was kind of coming to an end almost. And I pushed everything back. Um, and because COVID had hit so hard, initially everything was in lockdown. I actually moved back home and everything was done online for my undergrad thesis because only graduate students were allowed in the lab at that point. So I wasn't allowed to be actually like physically present there. But I would do all my work from home. I would do all my analyses online, and I would FaceTime with my supervisor as he showed me what he was doing and everything in the lab. So it was a strange experience. It was definitely not typical, but
What did you like about that? What did you dislike about that?
I liked that I had my own time to myself and I could really pick my own schedule, especially since I was an undergraduate student writing off of a graduate's project. Like, the expectation, of course, is to go along with his schedule was. But since I was mostly just analyzing images and data, I could really do that on my own accord and just make sure it was, sent by a certain due date.
Hmm.
I enjoyed that. And that was also a good thing for me to realize. I didn't realize at the time how important that was, but as I grew up and, beyond what I did at that moment, I was like, ooh, I really don't like to be micromanaged. I really enjoy having a lot of autonomy over my own work. Um, but yeah, so I enjoyed that a lot. I really felt like I was missing out in the sense that I couldn't be physically present. I felt like I was going to lack some skills that would be expected from me in my graduate studies, because I was not physically there to, run Western blots or, do whatever. So that was hard. Um, but yeah, I still really enjoyed my experience, though. I don't want to take away from that. It was, it was what it was. There was nothing I could do. So there was only so little anger or frustration that I felt like it was worthwhile allocating to that. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's totally reasonable. Everybody was going through it, so there's no
Yeah.
point in being frustrated. Like everybody was experiencing it in different ways. I would have just been curious, like based on so like what you said, you have specific skills that you didn't accumulate over that time because you were not physically there because you could not figure out how to run a machine from a different building.
Yeah.
But at the exact same time, you were still able to do so much. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. Have they brought everybody back in for 100% now? Like everybody's back in
Oh yeah.
the lab? Yeah,
But to my knowledge, I mean, I'm not at Mac anymore, so, but
fair
I'm
enough.
pretty sure.
Fair enough.
But
I would have, that just is interesting to me how that'll evolve with like hybrid roles and stuff in the future. Cause like
it
it was
depends.
easy to let you have your autonomy to your own schedule and do what you want to do. But
Yeah, I think it depends on
anyways,
school. Certain schools I think are more inclined to have undergraduates present, others are not. So yeah, there's a lot of different influencing factors there.
just
But
depends on what they're doing. But okay, so then you finished your degree. What did you do?
um, not a lot at first because it still was COVID. Um, this when I graduated, it was around the point that vaccines were starting to be talked about and things were slowly opening up. And it was really hard for me to know what the right step was to take. As I'm sure everyone can attest to, it was a hard time to be alive, just generally. Um,
Yeah.
and
Let alone transitioning alive was hard, but like to be
yeah,
transitioning out of your education and not know where to live and not know where to work and not know what to do. It's like, oh,
I
great.
didn't know how long. Like, no one knew how long this was going to last, how deeply it would impact institutions and workplace environments and all that kind of stuff. And just on like emotionally, it was a heavy time to just be present. And yeah, it was very isolating. So I just didn't really know what to do. There was no recipe out there for what to do after you graduate in a global pandemic. So I took a few months to myself really to figure out what I wanted from life generally and also what I could do given the circumstances of the culture, of
Yeah,
yeah,
just what
societally.
was happening.
Yeah. But the first thing I ended up doing was I started to apply to physiotherapy assistant jobs because the way that I saw it was like, okay, I don't really want to go back to school quite yet because I don't want to study in an environment where I don't have full opportunity. And I think that was definitely influenced by the fact that like I wasn't allowed in the lab physically during my thesis, so I was like, I don't really know if that's the next step for me quite yet. My mind had always been on grad studies. I always wanted like I knew I wanted to do a master's at some point, but I just in my gut felt like it wasn't the right time for me at least. So
Hmm.
I wanted things to be a little more clear, just with COVID and whatever. before I took that next step, so I could really get my full experience from it. So yeah, I started to apply to physiotherapy assistant jobs. Even though I know I said before that I was not interested in that type of work, I felt like I really had no choice because at least healthcare, those types of jobs were available and there was really good market for them because so many people were ill, and
Yeah.
yeah, so I had my first job as a physiotherapy assistant in a long-term care facility. And it was interesting. I worked for an agency, so I didn't actually work for the home itself, but for a company that supplied the physiotherapists to them.
Hmm.
And I'd never had a job like that, so that was interesting to um, adjust to.
Experience.
Yeah, and I really did enjoy the job. Not because I was doing physio with them. I actually hated doing the physio, but I really loved connecting with the older folks that lived there. Um, connection, I think, especially I really, it's interesting too to think back. It's like during that time, connection felt so important because we had all been stripped, had it stripped away from us so deeply with no control over
Mm.
anything. So to be there and feel like I was making a difference in these people's.
Specifically in an old folks home, because not only like everybody feels like they were stripped regardless, so it doesn't matter
Yeah,
where you were living or what was going on. People experienced COVID in different ways, but I think specifically in old folks home, retirement homes,
yeah,
anywhere with a general, I mean, group of people who are just a little bit older, they had such bigger, more intense guidelines around who could come in and who could be seen and who could get out. And
yeah,
to be somebody who got to go into those places and to have that heart. I mean, like that's just, it was impressive to hear kind of some of the stories that you shared throughout that of, yeah, the physiotherapy assistant role was great, but it didn't actually seem like it had any part to do with the actual work. It seems like all of it was just so much about the connection of the people and the
yeah,
other workers, like the other employees that you were working with too.
definitely. Yeah, it was a hard job. It was unsettling to think that like people are dying in the home and like because of COVID rules, it's like you're allowed one visitor when you die, and yeah, to have that weigh on me a lot of the time was hard. So to the fact that I could just be present and use some of my time with these people to do their physio, but also talk to them about their families, about their life before, and to try to be something that at least could be consistent for these people who have no structure anymore. And a lot of people like don't know the actual statistic, but it's unsettling the amount of people that are severely mentally ill in these places because of how isolated they are. Um,
Mm.
and they're infantilized a lot by the people that work there, by their families. Um, and yeah, the thing I enjoyed about that job was the people had nothing to do with physio, but um, yeah,
Infant, say that word again. Infantis. What was that?
infantilized, like treating someone like they're a child,
I
like
have
you.
never heard that word before. I really like that word. There you go.
I
The more
mean,
you
like,
know.
yeah, it's like when nurses come in and go like kind of talk to them in a baby voice,
Hey,
like, "Oh, did you wet the
sweetie.
bed?" That type of thing was really agitating, and yeah, so just being around that, I was like, "Ooh, I don't really. That's not. I don't like that." So it's like if there's anything I can do, of course, I can't necessarily control other people's behaviors, but I have full control over how I interact with people. So it became imperative to me that like as best as I humanly could, every person that I connect with there, I'm like, I want them to feel seen, heard. I want to learn from them. And just like, it became a really big source of kind of like my purpose and meaning in that phase of my life. And yeah, it was a rewarding job. It was very hard. I quit that job. Not related to the people that work there. That's actually a whole other thing is the work culture in long-term care during a pandemic was not fun. I found it very hard to come into work some days, and it really reinforced, I think, my own values in a workplace where I don't enjoy being micromanaged. And I'm not saying that the system the system is flawed, don't get me wrong. A lot of it is kind of hard to navigate though, because of course there needs to be golden standards. Patients need to, or residents need to be protected, whatever it is. But because of how stressful the job is, you're surrounded by, sickness and death a lot of the time. It's a little depressing. But then on top of that, because of COVID, there's understaffing constantly. There's terrible patient or resident ratios to staff. It's unsafe. People are working overtime and overworked. People are getting sick. They can't come in. They're being told off if they come in and they have, any symptoms. You have to go get, a test and wait for the symptoms to pass and the test to come back negative to even be allowed to come into the workplace, but then being penalized for taking time off. It was a mess. So that was really hard for
Do
me.
you do you think that's yeah? I mean, I this is a healthcare system of its own. Don't want
Yeah.
to touch it. Healthcare system of its own in COVID. Not with a 10-foot pole.
Ooh.
But people say that you typically learn more in your first year post grad than you do in your entire undergraduate degree. Do you think you learned more? I mean, like technically, probably not, but maybe just like how to handle yourself, how to handle yourself with people, how to communicate with others, how to work with people that you're surrounded by, how to deal with management and like all of those different things. Do you feel like you learned more in your first year of employment than you did in your entire undergrad, or do you think that doesn't really relate for you?
I think that learned more is maybe not the language that I would use for it. I learned a lot about very different things. And I will say that the things that I learned were very impactful onto how I would structure my entire life. So I do think I learned things that had more weight to them than I did in my school because it's kind of like a concept actually within research that like theory and practice are very different things. What you read on paper is not necessarily how it's going to play out, when you're in the lab actually really doing it. And
Yeah.
that really reigns true, I think, in that scenario as well. No matter what I learned in my school, I could never have been prepared for what happens in a workplace. And it's kind of like when people talk about, oh, I learned X, Y, and Z in school and I never applied in my real life. So there were a lot of skills that I really had to pick up on the job that no one had prepared me for. And so I learned a
Do
lot that
you
very quickly. And
Do you
yeah.
think that do you think like if you could go back or maybe just when you have kids one day because I know just because of our relationship
Hmm.
grew up as an athlete who was really into school, like you always like you didn't work, you were an athlete and you were a student, you're a
Hmm.
student athlete. Oh my gosh, how did I forget that term? That was like student athlete, everybody loved that. So you were a student athlete but you never worked, and so do you think that you could have learned some of those lessons earlier on at like 14, 15, 16? Had you been employed? Would you change that? Or do you like the path that you took of the student athlete and then the transition? How would like, that's a really loaded question, but do with it what you will.
I like yes and no. I think that being a student athlete also taught me things that I wouldn't have worked or learned in the workplace. Um,
Mhm.
and
We'll also be talking to a student athlete. I'm going to talk to someone else very soon who's currently working a student athlete life and not in any working situation. So I'll ask him a very similar question, but because it also translates through, I'm just curious.
yeah, I think that like when you work on a or when you play on a team, like a team sport, because I did both. Was a team athlete as well as an individual athlete. So having both sides of that, it's like not only do I learn how to be my own advocate and to like, do well for myself, but also I really learned in those scenarios how to, how to do things for the team rather than for yourself and to see yourself as one unit so their successes become yours. So I think that
Hmm.
that was really helpful for me and how I adapted, my own working style. Um, and I don't, it's hard for me to speak on because I don't know what a job at 14 would have done for me because I was not 14 having a job.
Fair
Um,
enough.
and I was really fortunate that I was not in a situation family wise where I had to do that. And I think that a lot of the time, whether it's parental values or necessity, like people who are that young and working, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I feel fortunate that I didn't have to be in that position. I think I would have been too thinly strung out. But yeah, it
I
wasn't.
just wonder. I just wonder if you had had those experiences at 14 and 15, if it would have changed the education path that you took. Not the like, I mean, everybody goes through a different path. Everyone ends up at the destination that they get to for whatever reason. But like, if it would have helped you skip over the, I want to be a chiropractor stage of just the middle ground.
I don't think so.
No?
No, because the
Well, there
job
you
that
go.
I've been working at 14 years old would have had nothing to do with that. You know, it's like, what's a retail job going to teach me about what I want to do forever?
Oh,
Besides the fact that I don't want to be in retail. You know?
I think you would be surprised. I have worked a retail job I mean,
Well, I
that's
have as
a,
well, but not when I was like, but when I was like older, like 17. But
I feel like that translates. No, like I worked a retail job at 14 and I feel like the lessons that I learned at that about like not being micromanaged and like wanting my own independence. This was all pre-COVID, like so far away. Like this was like 24, this was a decade ago. Um Dang. I've been working for a decade and I'm okay. Anyways, we'll move on from that. But I feel like those lessons at that age would have been very similar, maybe less intense, maybe with less meaning, but probably fairly similar in just the way who I am as like a human being and the way that I behave with other people in the working place. Like those rubs would have been the same. I don't know.
I think that when I was working jobs like that, I did feel the sense that I didn't like being kind of bossed around, but also it just felt like it was a part of the job. I felt like it was like, you know, the hierarchy of that. And I'm like, this is the best I can do like for jobs right now. Like I'm only, you know, like 18, 17 years old or whatever it is. And it made me realize that I really didn't like working with people sometimes. Like at least in retail, I was like, you guys are really annoying. Like, and I don't like you talking to me rudely. So that in that sense, it made me realize that what I wanted to do in the future was likely, you know, something that I had a lot of control over. And the way that I saw
Mhm.
chiropractic jobs and physiotherapy jobs was like I would open up my own clinic and I would be like, you know, the owner. So
Sure.
I feel like, yeah, my issue with like practical jobs like a therapist or physiotherapist or chiropractor or whatever it is had nothing to do with that. It was really just I didn't like the job. Like I did not like doing stretching with people. I didn't want to work with people in that sense. Um,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
and
That makes
for my
sense.
my PTA job, like I literally felt like I had no other option. Like that was the best job I could find at the time. So that was just what I ended up doing, and it was real. I'm really glad that I worked there. Like really. So
And sometimes like that's just what happened. It's just the nature of what the market is in front of you
yeah,
and
they
needing
get
to
bossed
put
around or have no.
need
So
yeah, exactly. Work or don't work. This is what you can do. This is your
yeah,
option.
I think I'll grit my teeth here a little bit and just have some money so I can
Yeah.
get food. But you know, um,
Eating is always nice. Okay, so you did a couple jobs where you were working as a what was the proper term for that? A physiotherapist assistant.
for the first position, I was a physiotherapy assistant, and then for my second position in long term care on that dementia unit, I was a restorative care aide. That
What's the
placement,
difference?
restorative is a little bit more into nursing, whereas physio is very just physio. I When I was a restorative care aide, I did do some physio stuff, but I also worked on like occupational therapy, just mental well being, and that kind of thing. So I liked that job better in that sense that I had more control over it. And also I wasn't an assistant. So I wasn't working under a physiotherapist who was prescribing, you know, exercise for me to
Treatments.
give, yeah,
Yeah.
to the residents. But I got to kind of come up with my own treatments. Of course, it would be approved. Like I wasn't like out there crafting like, you know, whatever. But I um I got to decide, you know, what was important, what to include. I got to pitch my own ideas, so I did enjoy that. And also, I was only placed on one unit, whereas in my PTA job, I was the PTA for multiple different floors and units. So I really got to become close with the people that I worked with in that unit because I was there every single day with the exact same people, and I really enjoyed that as well because it also meant that I was working with the same group of staff all the time as well. So there was a lot more consistency in that sense. And my values that I care, like, you know, really held dear to me in my first position about, you know, connection became so much easier for me because I'm like, I'm with you guys every day. And so I enjoyed that job a lot. And unfortunately, like my first job, it was the management issues um, that were they waited on me so heavily that it was no longer, I think, worth it for me to work there. Just so.
Fair enough. And so after that, you transitioned to bartending. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I
Talk me
first
through this.
Yes, I didn't know what I was going to do at first. I quit my job pretty abruptly. Don't be like me, and yeah, I could have dealt with that more gracefully.
Well,
But
actually, but no. I mean, understanding the situation, you had gone through the ringer with these people, the management
yeah,
team, and I am the first person to tell anybody that they need to work. Like, you need to finish. You need to finish out what
yeah,
you're doing. You need to. But for you specifically, and we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of that because it's not relevant. But it is important to note that sometimes your mental health is getting put in the way, and you're now at a disadvantage. Like, money aside, you're in such a place that it's unhealthy for you to continue entering this environment every day, and protecting yourself is important. It's like when you're on an airplane, if you can't put your own mask on first, you
yeah,
can't put on anybody else's mask around you. And so specifically in a healthcare facility, when you're working with other people and their well-beings, if your well-being is not in check, what place do you have supporting other people in theirs? And I mean, everybody goes through seasons, but like, understanding that you were consistently being beaten into a place that was like detrimental to you,
yeah,
sometimes you have to take care of yourself.
for sure. I mean, yeah, we won't get into it. The premise is just it was a very toxic work environment, and then like the nature of what I was doing was already heavy. So I'm like, I can't have both at once put on me, like onto me. I would leave the job and never leave it mentally. So I moved on from that, and I actually came to Florida to see you. And it
Oh
was
my gosh, yeah, and then I helped you get a job.
that got me the job. So Hannah got me into the
Gotta love a staffing friend. Anybody who needs a job, come call me
of
out. Let me help
course.
hook you up. I
And
forgot about that.
yeah, no, Hannah, thank bless her, got me my first serving position. So I I feel like it's uncommon to be like, oh, how old would I have been? Like 22, 23, 23, I think.
It is very, very uncommon. Most people start as like a host at 15,
Yeah,
then they like are like a bar back, and then they do like the serving, and then yeah, but starting as a bartender at 20, 22, 23 was like really weird.
yeah, and it was my first position, and thankfully, yeah, Hannah just got me connected to someone who took a chance on me and was like, you seem great, so you'll come in and we'll, see how it goes. And I initially loved it. It was such a transition and difference from the job I was doing before, where I was like, it was so heavy and so whatever. And now I'm like, now we're just in like a fun environment. It was at an indoor golf simulator. So it wasn't even like a restaurant. So it was actually, as far as serving jobs go, really low intensity, I would say. It wasn't like I
Yeah.
was being, yelled at from the kitchen staff and all that kind of stuff. Like I just worked with people all day who were really happy. They were just golfing and everyone's in a good mood. And I just poured beers and it was fun. So I really enjoyed that initially, especially since I realized during long term care how much I liked connecting with people. Being able to do that there without all the death and all that kind of stuff, I was like, this is great. Like I get the exact same thing, kind of. And
And and realistically, you were making a lot more money.
I was making double the amount of money that I was making in long term care, working less hours. And
That's insane. That's so insane. The healthcare pay.
I was getting paid at my PTA job minimum wage. And it was
And
unsettling to have a 4-year degree to come out and be like, I could have worked at Walmart and made the exact same amount of money. No issue with either of the jobs, but it's like, why did I just accumulate tens of thousands of dollars of debt at school to just get paid 15 an hour?
yeah. And
Anyway,
it's so hard because, and I don't really want to dive into this much because talking about pay rates and how this all progresses is not the point of this
sure.
podcast. But gosh dang, like, you have to get the first job. Like, you have to go to school to get the degree. You have to get the degree before you can get the first job. You have to get the first job before you can get the second job. But the first job has to pay you like dog crap so that you can get the experience to get the second job. The system, my. Anyways,
Yeah.
um, okay, so all of this brings you back to where you are right now, which is now getting your degree, your master's?
Yes. So when I was actually still working in long-term care, it was coming to the end of like, my time there. I started to apply to grad schools because I realized very quickly, holy F, I literally can't do this forever. I need to go back to school. I need to do
Right.
something that is of interest to me where I'm going to have some growth in my professionalism and also in my own career. And I was like, I want to build something for myself. I miss school. I love school. Like, I do good in school. And I would love to get back into research. So I applied to a few neuroscience programs, one of which was Western, where I'm at now. And then I went to bartending and I, was upfront and yeah,
I
everyone.
forgot. Yeah, that was the hump of I'm going back to school,
Yeah.
but I need to continue working. I forgot that was all very open and clear. He knew that you were leaving.
Yeah.
Um,
And it was interesting at the time because
which, if
Mhm.
anybody, as a side note, is looking for work in an interim, is the way to do it. For anyone who's like, oh, I need work for 3 months, but like, I don't want to tell my boss, just tell your boss. You're just looking for work for 3 months. Normally, employers are actually very happy to bring on temporary help for seasonal support. But going into a job to be like, I'm going to work here forever and then leaving after a couple of months when you knew upfront that you were going to leave is, as an employer, one of my biggest pet peeves. So, anyways, back to you.
Yeah, and I will say it was easy for me in that position since indoor golf is a seasonal job anyways. So it
Yeah.
just transitioned really nice. And also I was fortunate in that position as well. I was offered another opportunity at a golf course for the summer, just through the
Mm-hmm.
connections within that workplace. So I really enjoyed my time doing that. But then I was accepted into school. And it was hard though, because even though I was accepted academically, I then had to find a supervisor who would take me on. So even though I was working on these things, I was really left with like two crossroads where it's like, hey, I'm either not going to find a supervisor, and I guess I'm just going to bartend and then apply again and do another year of this because I don't know what else to do, or I'm going to be upfront and be like, hey, I might leave. I don't know how long I'm going to stay, but if I get accepted to school, I'm peacing out. So
Yeah, which if you have an employer who is any sort of genuine human being, if they're looking at a young student and you're like, okay, I am going to offer you this experience so that you can continue working, but if you're able to go back to school, so excited for you.
yeah.
Like it should just be like a clap and a push as they're headed off, like it shouldn't be any sort of I'm mad that you are leaving, or
Do
there
better.
should never be any guilt trip. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was really fortunate that that was the case. I was not hounded on for doing so, and I was supported and encouraged to
Nice.
extend my career in that sense. So then, yeah, I thankfully found a supervisor late into the summer. I will say it was not until the end of July, beginning of August, and may I remind you all that September is when school starts. So that begun the most stressful month of my life where I'm trying to find an apartment. I'm trying to just navigate everything and move all my stuff and pack everything up and go to London, which is 3 hours from our hometown. And anyway, so it all came together beautifully. Settled up there now, loving my life, living my dream. And yeah, so I'm now in my master's of neuroscience within a lab, my supervisor, Dr. Suzanne Schmid, and we look at a rat model of autism. And specifically, I am looking at electrical activity recordings within the auditory cortex and looking at a drug treatment to try to mitigate some of the differences we see between neurotypical and neurodivergent, specifically with autism rats.
Okay, so break that down into a simpler term for listeners who might not be able to grasp that. You're working with animals um,
Yes.
to try and figure out.
Yeah. So in the world of research, before anything goes to human trials, it of course has to be done in animals or preclinical trials.
Mhm.
So that's the work that I do. And yeah, we're working with a rat model of autism. And basically, these rats have a genetic mutation that results in autistic like traits, such as decreased sociability, different, like sensory processing. And in the sensory processing aspect of that, I narrow in even further and look at only auditory processing differences. And there's so if you think about just neurotypical versus a person with autism, they're more sensitive to loud sounds. They perceive sounds as more loud and agitating than another person would. They startle more easily. They don't habituate to loud sounds as easily as well. So that's where a lot of my research focuses on. And I'm looking at the molecular side of that. So there's kind of two sides where you look at the behavior itself, and I'm looking at the underlying molecular kind of mechanisms that might modulate those behaviors. And I look at single neurons within the associated, region in the brain that's responsible for sound perception and recording the activity from these neurons, um, and looking at the differences and the effects of a drug treatment on them, to help contribute to that literature.
That is wild.
It is
Um,
wild. It's
I'm
very
sorry.
wild.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around it because you and I have talked about it a couple of times, but taking a
Sure.
moment to actually try and digest it is really interesting. So how are you doing that? You're recording the data. What data are you looking at? You're looking at cells, you're looking at behavior, you're looking at is it are you explain more. Are you watching yeah, I'm just so curious. Like, is it all the science? I don't even know how you articulate this properly. Like, are you are you watching the rat in the form of like the way that it behaves, the way that it acts? Like, are you putting it in environments where you're stimulating the sound around it and like turning the lights on and on? That's not audio, that would be visual, but okay, like putting sounds on, different vibrations and whatnot. Or is it all I take their blood, I cut their brain open, I'm looking at their like what is this?
So, I mean, within the lab itself, both are done. There are people that do look at behavioral stuff. We have protocols such as like there's a sound avoidance protocol where they put the rat into a dark room, and rats prefer the dark light, like the dark. They don't want the light.
Okay.
And we have a protocol where you start playing loud sounds to see at what point do the sounds become so aggravating that they'd actually rather go into a box that is light but has less sound, where their normal preference to be in that dark light is overridden by the stimulation that the loud sounds cause. And the rats who model autism will leave the dark room and go into the light environment to avoid the loud sounds more quickly than the wild type or the neurotypical rats do. So you would say from that they have increased sound avoidance. They're less tolerant to loud sounds. So that's one example. I actually have nothing to do with that. I don't do that.
That's so interesting. Do you know why? I mean that aside, whether it's the behavioral or the molecular, is that the right word?
Yep.
Okay, I'm listening, I'm learning. Whether it's behavioral or the molecular side of it, do you know why people with autism or the rats don't like the sound? Like, what is it about that's agitating?
So that's where the molecular side really comes in, and this is why I love molecular research. It's like it's the net underneath that no one sees, that is the mechanisms that push these behaviors. So
Mm-hmm.
it's awesome that you see all these behavioral differences, but then the molecular people come in and try to find the mechanisms within the brain, within the body, whatever it is, that might be the cause of what's going on. So in that case, for example, the neurons in the brain of the rats who model autism are more hyperexcitable, especially at younger ages. So, it takes less stimulation for them to get that firing in their brain to go off.
Hmm.
Um,
And
and
what's the result of that? Like on an average person, like what comes from that?
it, it's hard because with rats, not everything you do, like this is the issue sometimes with,
Yeah, it doesn't always translate.
doesn't always translate. And it's hard to do molecular research on humans because, I mean, for me to do my molecular research, I kill the rat and I take out the brain. So you can't really do that with real people, but
Humans on a regular basis. Yeah.
yes. But what you can do in the lab is use drug treatments, and if they have really good success on modulating or rectifying these, abnormal or problematic kind of behaviors and whatnot, if we then take those treatments and apply them to humans, and if they're done safely and all that kind of stuff and they work, like, then that's the really, really exciting thing that molecular research brings to the table, is that you can come up with treatments that might rectify or at least, help some of these issues.
Processes. How long does that typically take
Years,
from
decades,
the decades? Okay, so from yeah, not like the not the research stage, but like the thought to the implementation.
very long time. Like, you first have to do it, preclinically, and then there's this whole process where it has to be like, approved by. It's not the FDA here, I don't think, or is it? I don't even know. That's pretty bad. I should know that, but like, let's call it the
I
FDA.
was gonna say, you're asking me, girl.
It's been a while since I've gone over this whole process, but there has to be a lot of approval, and then like going back and doing it again and doing it again and doing it again, and finally, because it's like ethics are involved, and everything has to be very regulated. And anyways, it's
So
a very
which so which stage do you work in right now? It's in
preclinical.
the animal testing, so clinical. So what comes after this? Would it be humans?
Like, yes, but also there would have to be a lot of. It would have to be approved first, and then I don't know.
Like it's still a ways away.
Very far in the future.
Okay. 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 Very cool. So tell me about what it is that you do every single day. Say that you walk into the office, you walk into the lab. It's not an office. You walk into
It's
the
an
lab.
office, but yeah,
It's an office. Whatever.
it's
Same.
both. There's an office
You
and a lab, but
you set your stuff down. You've clocked in. Whatever it is that you have to do to start the day. You've gone to the bathroom, put your coat up. Whatever. What's the first thing you're doing? How do you typically walk through the day? What does it look like for you?
so when I have experimental days where I work with the rats and I take my brain slices and whatnot, I walk into the lab, I start setting everything up.
So casual. So casual. I take my brain slices. Sorry, continue.
I Yeah, I set everything up for the prep of the rat. So I'm turning there's like a little bath of water that I turn on for like keeping this thing liquid. It's like I don't even know how to talk about this like without getting too technical. Um I make some solutions that I need during the process, like um, I make artificial cerebrospinal fluid, and that's
Okay.
what the cell, or not the cells, sorry, the slices bathe in. So they sit in that to keep the cells alive. So I make that solution. I
Okay.
also use that solution later on during my recordings, because the slices sit in that bath solution again while I look at them under a microscope. Um, so I do all that kind of preparatory stuff. I then go to the animal facility. I collect my rat, and I bring it back.
One rat every day?
Yeah, like not
Yeah.
it. I usually do like three probably experiments. It depends. It depends on because I we do in-house breeding with the rats, so I pair a female and a male, and the birds and the bees happen, and then I get a litter of pups. And then my experiments run and are dependent on how old they are, so they're postnatal day. So it depends on how old the pups are that I'm dealing with, how many I would do in a week. But let's say on average, maybe 3 a week. Um,
That's so interesting.
yeah, and
Okay.
also
So you get your
I'm scheduling different pairs to be bred, so that way there's like not always an overlap, or there's not too much of a gap in between the different litters. You know what I mean? So it's like,
what an interesting aspect of your job that I never could have pictured. I breed
yeah,
rats.
I literally say in the lab sometimes, I'm like, I'm gonna go play God with my rats. I'm like, because I'm like, bury them together. It's very strange. Very
I'd be calling it Tinder. I'd be like, I'm gonna go play Tinder. I'll be back. I'm just gonna go put a couple rats in a box for some Netflix and chill.
honestly though, you like, come back in 21 days, separate them, hope she's pregnant, and it's very strange. I find myself multiple times throughout my day when I'm like, what am I literally doing? Like, what is going on? This is my life. So
What is this? Okay, so you get your pup.
yes, and then I bring the rat. I sacrifice it. Rest in peace. And at
You had
that,
to do that.
yes, yeah. They're also, may I say, it is ethical. They're anesthetized. They're under entirely. They feel no pain at this point. We put them in a deep plane of sedation, so that way you can't. It would be like if you went into surgery, they decapitated you, and that you wouldn't feel the pain.
Yeah. I remember you telling me a while ago that you, and now please correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I remember it was cut the head off of a rat today. Um, and this was the spot that I thought they died. I thought it was like
Oh my god, no.
strapped and that was the way that I pictured it. And I was like, who is this human
No,
that
that's a lot.
I have had sleepovers with since we were 13 years old? I'm slightly concerned for everything. No, so you did explain to me, yes, that they are euthanized, like put to sleep, and then, but you're taking the brain out of their head. So like
Yeah, so
is
we
there
cut.
any use for the body?
No, it's discarded.
Okay. I
I
wasn't
It's
sure. I was,
probably used for something. I'm pretty sure that they recycle carcasses to be because we also have macaques and primates at Western, and I'm pretty sure that a lot so they get recycled in that sense to create food for other animals.
what
So
does that mean? A crocs and what else is that Western? You said two words.
macaques, it's like a monkey, like a primate.
Oh,
So it's not just there's not just rats research. There's rabbits, there's cats, there's macaques, there's a bunch of animals like there's primates. So
that's so interesting. Would this ever flow from rats into something else? Like would you ever be doing this on cats? Would you ever be doing it on monkeys? Like is it going to
you could.
translate?
You could for sure. I don't know if that research exists. I'm at least at Western. I don't know if people are doing that, but if there is an established model of autism that you can, make in a
Like
animal model, yeah, then there's no reason why you couldn't be able to see if it translates. It's hard though because different animals have different kind of systems in play. So there's different sizes of the brain. There's whatever.
hmm.
But the thing, yeah, I don't know. That's such an interesting question. I have not looked at that. But
How would you deal with that from your side? Because all of it is ethical. Like don't. It's for the future of humanity. Like we're trying to do it so that we can help people in the future. I don't want
yeah,
to discredit or belittle anything, but you are killing something, and it is like a bit of a emotional draw. So how would you deal with that if it was a cat who you love cats, or a monkey who you've like never interacted with? Like a rat is a rat, and so I imagine it makes it a little bit simpler, but maybe not. Maybe it's like a life is a life and I'm taking a really bad view at it. But like what would that do for you? How would that affect you?
I don't know that I could work with cats just because I do have my own cat, so that hits a little close to home. But like generally speaking, I would say life's a life, and no matter how big or small, like an animal's still
An animal.
an animal with a soul. So I
Yeah.
yeah, no, it is hard. I think but at least in my case, I think that when I'm doing this work, I kind of turn off that part of my brain to the best that I can, and kind
Yeah.
of see it as a part of the process, and it has to be done. And it's certainly not my favorite part about my work, but I try my best to be respectful, and I do think that it helps mentally for me to realize that they're anesthetized and completely under and not feeling any pain. And I mean,
Hmm.
personally, I usually in my own mind, not that I'm very religious or anything, but I do like almost like a little prayer just to thank the animal for contributing to science and all that kind of stuff, and just trying to honor the animal as best as I can. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, just because I obviously
Like
it's
just with the most respect.
yeah, I try. Yeah, I try to be as respectful as possible, and it really is important research. Like these animals are factors into changing lives. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's my
Absolutely.
take on it. I think that some people, yeah, it's a little bit controversial. I think animal research in that sense, where not everyone's going to be on board, but at the end of the day, like all the vaccines and antibiotics that you take, like who do you think that was practiced on first? So
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to see it from from a perspective, I mean, everybody's got different perspectives on it, and I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth. I'm thankful for it personally. Like
Yeah.
it's a really hard thing to do. It's a challenging thing that you go through every single day. And I'm impressed by it because not everybody has the capability to do that or the wherewithal to be like, no, this is right. And it's right because it's doing this. But it's a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year perspective, which we talked about at the very beginning. You're so good at that, having that granular, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I'm making
Mhm.
this decision, right? We talked about that with your education and expanding it. And so it sounds like that's just part of the qualifications or part of the makeup of the kind of person that ends up in that role. Do you see that a lot through the people that you work with, like that just really elongated perspective?
I would say so. I think that a lot of people in research are able to kind of have like, the long haul in mind where it's like, it's there's not like it's not a easy like immediate reward type of work. It's very like long term, like you hustle and you just get through it because you know that in the future it'll all be worth it and you'll have a really cool project with all the data that you've accumulated over time. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a zoomed out perspective is maybe a bit innate to some of the people that research attracts. I don't know. That's a pretty big assumption, and I don't really know if that's true. But it
Fair
just
enough.
the
But
people
with,
that I've met and that I work with
yeah,
say that most people are kind of like that, where they're able to be patient and be mindful and to have perspective. Yeah.
yeah, I think that that's important. I cannot imagine doing what you do for literally every single reason, from like the I don't have the patience, I don't have the concept of sitting in front of a microscope, and I haven't used a microscope since 10th grade science.
To see the one I
um
use is nothing like 10th grade, I'll tell you that. When I walked
I
into the room
believe
for the
it.
first time, I literally was like, "Are y'all sure?" Like, I don't think I should do this. I'm like, did you? I think you have the name.
Okay.
It's not for me.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit because
Yeah.
70% of people struggle with imposter syndrome regardless. But realistically, you are a 24-year-old girl and you're sorry, female woman. Sometimes people say that the term girl is offensive. Actually, I would love your perspective on this because personally it doesn't bother me at all. But someone told me, they were like, you shouldn't call someone like a girl. Like that's like a woman. And like I'm like,
I
because
mean,
and it was someone referring to me. It was like they were like, "Oh, I shouldn't call you girl. Like I'm so sorry. I should never do that." And I was like, "It doesn't really bother me. I mean, I identify as a girl. It's how
yeah,
I grew up. It's how I publicly portray myself, but I don't know."
I think
Anyways,
that I think it depends on how the person uses the term and the intention that they hold underneath it. Like, I very rarely
they're
am I called girl in an undermining way. Um,
right. Their concept was that it was like belittling in the sense of girls are young and women are older. And they're like, "You're not a girl, you're a woman." And I'm like, "No,
I think I'm
but I
both.
am a girl."
A girl, but I'm like also like a woman. Like I'm literally both. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
know.
Anyways, so not offensive in
Not to me.
our
Not to
minds.
me. I call everybody girl.
Okay. I do too. I do too. I'm like, girl, literally what a good name. Like, girl, I love you so much, or it's been so long, or whatever.
It's like an endearing.
So
Anyways, sidebar.
I think so too. I think so too. Well, but that's good to know from two like girls who are young, and like the concept of it being offensive to
Yeah.
us
Sometimes I'm a
is
girl.
okay.
Other times I'm a woman. That's all I'll say.
Sometimes I'm a girl and sometimes I'm a woman.
I'm a
So
7 or no, what was it? I'm a 24-year-old teenager. That's what people say on TikTok.
I've been seeing that. I'm a 24-year-old teenager. I am a 24-year-old teenager. I don't know anything from anything. So, okay, but let's talk about that concept, that literal concept. Okay, I say this all the time. That's the third time I've said that today. And this is something that I'm working on because I do know something from something. I
Mm-hmm.
am not stupid. I have gone through an education. I
You're
have
very smart. I can attest to it.
years of experience. Right.
Like
This
now.
is now I'm going to translate it back to you. Was not supposed to be a self-boosting moment. So I struggle with imposter syndrome all the time.
Yeah.
And I say stuff like, I don't know anything all the time. and I need to stop it because I do know stuff and that's actually belittling who I am as a human being. What was it like for you coming into your master's, having just taken a little bit of time off, getting some of that real world experience, but also having your undergraduate degree for having the technical experience that you need, but coming into your master's program with a month of notice, like kind of a little bit like a fish out of water, just like wasn't ready for it, wasn't preparing necessarily, like I'm here, I'm doing it, I've got the background I need, I've got the education that I need, but like, oh my gosh, what was that experience like? Did you struggle with imposter syndrome at the beginning? Maybe are you still? Where does that lie for you?
Definitely at the beginning, I think imposter syndrome was a really big kind of thing for me to navigate that I didn't, which is interesting to say because I feel like I should have expected that. But I don't know. I think I was just so busy just getting everything together. By the time I got there, I was like, wow, that was really fast. I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, I'm actually here now. I'm like, okay. And I had a lot of transitions to deal with when I first moved into my new apartment and everything to be there for school. Because one, like you'd mentioned, I did take a couple years off. So it had been a little while since I'd been a student just on its own, like just as a student. Then transitioning from undergraduate to graduate, where the values within academia are very different. In your undergraduate degree, you're really graded and based on performance, and it's about how much you can learn, how much you can, handle on your plate at one time and still perform well. Whereas in your graduate studies, so one of the guys in our program, our director, talks about how we're project managers. And we really are like, it's very independent. No one is telling you where to be and what to do. I create my entire schedule on my own. My supervisor and me only talk about issues unless I bring them up. Otherwise, she assumes everything is fine. I plan out everything on my own project. I was given a little bit of guidance as to what to do, but like, it really is me who's kind of
Do you,
navigating everything. If I have a question, if I'm confused, I have to reach out to, my resources in that sense. So that was difficult to transition to as well. And then also in my case, I didn't have a neuroscience background. Of course, kinesiology was slightly adjacent in the sense that like I know what a neuron is and I know about some of the basic anatomy stuff, but like there was a lot of principles in my first semester that I had to on my entire, my own time learn to be able to talk somewhat eloquently. Even then, I think eloquent is a stretch. Like, and I'm still working on now. Just kind of catching up to speed in that sense. And also, like, just even aside from school, like life, where it's like I'm moving into a new place, I'm adjusting to living on my own after being at my parents for a few years, just during COVID and everything. And that was another thing. And having my partner move into like with me too. So I was like, literally, my whole life is changed in practically every aspect. And the only thing that felt consistent was just that I'm in it. So like it's happening to me. So imposter syndrome was a pretty influential, thing in my first semester, especially towards the first half. I constantly found myself coming into the lab and feeling like I couldn't be trusted. Like, I don't know why you guys are, letting me do this. And it felt like there was a lot of weight and importance on the stuff that I was doing. But I was like, I feel like there should have been more training. I'm like, why am I here? So
yeah.
it was strange, but also it wasn't that I never thought that I couldn't do it. I thought that I could. I don't know. It was sometimes it felt really large conceptually to just take on all at once. And
Yeah. Well, it's a big step. It's a big step in every single way, right? It's your
yeah,
personal life, it's your professional life, it's your romantic life. You're stepping into like an adult relationship with your parents. It's like every piece of relationship
yeah.
um
And like
normality is changing, like your work, your home, your like everything. And so it makes sense that it was a big pivot. What was bigger? What felt like a bigger pivot to you? Was it the education side or was it the personal side? Were you like, where did you feel more imposter syndrome? Was it at home or was it at school?
I think imposter syndrome specifically was probably mostly at school. Um because I talked a lot with my mom about this when this was all happening, was like just change naturally is kind of something that you're ingrained to be a little bit resistant to. It's like it's got to really be worth it to change. And what was interesting was that I wasn't usually you change because you're unhappy with something. It wasn't that I was unhappy
Mm.
with my life before. I was fine. I had a good relationship. I was, doing well with my family, and I had a job that I enjoyed and paid well. But I chose to left it all behind, like to leave it all behind to pursue something bigger. And yeah, I don't know if I think I had like imposter syndrome just generally all around. Like it was, there were so many things that I was like, but it was fine. I'm like, why am I changing it? And I knew it would be worth it in the end. And coming back to like the being able to have some like bigger picture perspective was definitely critical at these moments for me, because I'm like, it's going to be hard and it's going to be different, but it's going to be worth it. And all it takes is time and adjustments as time goes on to kind of adapt. But yeah, it was not easy. I had my own like my own resistiveness to kind of push through, um,
Yeah,
just for
it
the sake
makes sense.
of not having to put energy into changing. But
Imposter syndrome is really hard. Like imposter syndrome is, I mean, kryptonite to so many people. But I had a somebody, I don't remember who it was. I was at a conference a long time ago, and they put it into perspective for me this way. They said that imposter syndrome, rather than being a red light, needs to be more like an orange light. Like if
mm,
you're driving down the road and you see a red light, you stop and you don't continue forward. But if you see an orange light, you continue with caution.
yeah,
And when you're moving forward into something new, of course, you want to proceed with caution. Of course, you want to make sure that you're keeping your head up and you're looking around and you're moving forward and you're being careful and safe. But it doesn't mean that you should necessarily stop. And so I had always been looking at imposter syndrome, like when I was starting to experience those, like, oh, I feel like I'm an imposter. Like, oh, I feel like I'm not meant to be here. Oh, I feel like I can't do this. And I was putting it as like a block. I was like, no, this means I can't move forward. This means like I'm at the capacity of where I should be. But
mhm,
instead, I made that pivot to be like, no, this just means that I need to keep my head up and be aware that what I'm doing is big and important and crazy. And it's exciting for me. And just to be
yeah,
cautious as I step forward. But it was like a really weird mental switch
mhm,
of it's not a no, it's just understand that what you're doing is scary and it's okay to experience some of those emotions through that process.
yeah. I think
So
that's such an important transition to take perspective wise, because I will say that I think that that was really pivotal to be able to get to a point where I did feel not only like I like was able to be there, but also deserving. Like it's like I worked
it
hard.
belonged.
Yeah. And having those moments where you do proceed with caution and, instead of seeing it as like, I'm not meant to be here, it's like just appreciate the situation for what it is and have feel the weight of the importance of what you're doing and
Mm,
kind of tread lightly. And by doing that, it allows you to try new things and to push your own boundaries and also build self esteem within yourself when you succeed. Because there was times where I was like, there's no way I could do that. And then I would do it and I would be like, well, okay, like I did it. So like that's
oh
pretty
my
good.
gosh.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then you have all these little successes over time. And like self esteem is not something that always lasts. It can be, you could have a great success and then, 2 months down the line, you still feel like the biggest idiot on the planet. So
Mm-hmm.
constantly pushing yourself and constantly, just saying yes to opportunities that might enable you to grow and evolve, I think really are pivotal to be able to maintain your self esteem, to get to a place where you're like, oh no, like I'm good at what I do. I bring something to the table, like I'm not just a part in this. I'm like an influencing like factor here. And
Mm-hmm.
that
And
is
you add value. It's like
exactly,
you
yeah.
add so much value. Like the research specifically for you, I mean, you told me this a little while ago. How many people at your school can do the research that you do?
There are I under 5 patch clampers, I think. Sorry for people listening. Patch clamping. What I do is called patch clamp recording. I like so that is the technical term of what I do when I say I record electrical activity. I'm patch clamp recording. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's a
But
niche
the
skill, is my point, I guess.
but the it's super niche, but the concept is like you walk into this facility and you're so overwhelmed. You see the equipment, you see the surroundings, you're like, oh my gosh, how can I be doing this? How am I this person who has the right to be here? Like, oh my word. But then you get a couple months into it and you're like, okay, now I've taken the time to learn this new step of what I'm doing. And of course I'm here because I did this thing when I did, because I started with the volunteer experience in your second year of university, and then you went through to your third semester and you started doing your practicals, and then you got into your fourth year and you were like, I need to expand it. And then you got into your fifth year and you did your research. Like every single one of those little movements gets you to the spot where you are right now. And even like so much more than that, like, yes, that is it, but also the time that you invested in it, the time that you took off in between it to become the person that you needed to be to get yourself to the spot where you're ready to submit the application and be comfortable enough in yourself to get there. Like there's so many steps between ground level and where you are now, and it's so easy to forget all of them because you're right, that reassurance, that like self-assurance in yourself is like it's easy to give up and to lose in the matter of a day. You can have one stranger who says something to you a little offsided and you're just upset about it for a week because it's like an impact that comes. So anyways, I wanted to dive in to a couple more things.
Yeah.
But we're really running our time out, and it sounds like I'm just gonna have to have you back for another episode at a different time because there's more to talk to you about.
I guess I'll do it. If it has to happen, I guess
if it has to happen. But
I'd love that.
thank you for joining me today. It was really interesting to learn. I know that so many people have misconceptions of Gen Zs. And really the purpose of this podcast is to help give the next generation, so Gen Zs and beyond, Gen Alpha, whoever comes next, the ability to look at different information and see some paths ahead of them. Just like what you said, seeing somebody who has taken a path and being able to follow behind them is so much easier than creating your own. So I really want to highlight so many different paths that different Generation Zs can look at, or others, and be like, I could do this and learn that from them. But also, I just, through the last year of giving all the Gen Z talks and all those presentations, there's so many misconceptions of who Gen Z is and why they are the way that they are. And so I think that through this series, I'll be able to talk to so many people just like you who will be able to explain, like, this is what I went through and this is why I experienced it and this is what I got from it and this is why I am the way I am. And so understanding kind of some of the repetitive flows that come from your entire journey, I think will be really beneficial. So anyways, all that to say, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we could,
of course,
have a conversation and really dive into some really important topics. I think what you're doing here is really awesome and important, especially with Gen Z coming full throttle into the workplace. And
oh my gosh,
it's very soon taking over. So that's really
25% of the workforce will be Gen Z by next year. Insane concept.
Crazy, eh? We're all getting old.
What I think it's so interesting because when I first graduated and came into the workplace, I was like, oh, I don't work with anybody my age. And now like half of our team is like Generation Z and just like growing. So
true,
anyways, but till next time.
Till next time, I love.